to Tracing Your Family Roots. I'm Chuck Mason, and before we start, I want to thank the Mount Vernon Genealogical Society, who sponsors our show every month, and also the staff here, Sydney Sachs, who's the producer, and the control room people and the camera people. Without them, we wouldn't be able to do the show. With me today is my guest, and also my co-host is Janelle Blue. And today we're going to talk about filling in timeline gaps like a professional researcher. Many of us use timelines to kind of keep track of things, and they can be quite helpful. Sharon Hodges, who has done a program a number of years ago was the one that really got a lot of us into using timelines. And genealogy is all about getting the correct answers to our questions. We can get good answers, but are they the correct ones? So, we want to know not just who, what, and where did we have things happen or what went on, but also, and oftentimes we have to hypothesize about why did things happen? Why did my great-grandparents get on a ship and come over from Scotland to Philadelphia, especially knowing what going on a ship across the Atlantic was? So, they had struggles in their life, and we really want to try to figure out why did they do some of the things. And we're not necessarily always going to find the answers, but we may hit a point where it's time to consult with a professional researcher to get their opinion. Or, as I've done for years, have a friend who is a genealogist and pass something on to them to get their opinion. So how do we get started, Janelle?
Well, Chuck, thank you. I'm happy to be here today to talk about this because I've had this experience recently. Actually, it was sort of this revelation that I had been making an assumption that I may or may not be well-founded. And I think that, first of all, writing about your ancestor is a great way to find all the gaps. It's one thing to take your program and it just zips out this report of all, who's related to whom and so forth. But then if you want to start putting a story around it, that's when you begin to say, well, now, wait a minute, what about this? And you can't really know about what went on at the kitchen table if your ancestors, or that pillow talk that you might really want to know, unless they left letters or diaries, and most of ours didn't.
Mine didn't either.
So then, you tend to want to try to make some hypothesis on maybe what was going on at the time. Now, my gap was actually, I had made this assumption about when they came to Texas. And I guess what I want to do today is to just leave you with a couple of thoughts. Be careful of what you think you know. Try to fill in the gaps with well-founded evidence. My friend says, we don't want to let facts get in the way of a good story. Well, in genealogy, you really do want those facts. And sometimes they don't come directly, they come indirectly, but they have to be worked out in a way that can be substantiated. And then finally, if you're watching this show, you're interested in genealogy, that means you probably have been noodling around on a database somewhere and you want to do some of it yourself, and you probably already have some. Do what you can before you hire the researcher, and later on I'll tell you why that's really important. So here's my example. I always assumed that my Wyman immigrant came directly to Texas from Prussia in 1855. Now, I grew up in that family. I know my ancestors, I know my great-grandparents. I can go to all the graves. I have all kinds of records. It never occurred to me that they might have been somewhere else before they came to Texas. And so, so when I did this timeline, that's when I started thinking about, well, wait a minute, is it possible that maybe they didn't, but I've never answered. So if I had written something in a document and said my answers came directly to Texas, that wouldn't be well founded.
Right.
So here's where I would start.
Okay.
Look for every bit of evidence that you can. And obviously my genealogical question is, when did my Wyman family come to Texas? And that assumption could be built in there, but it's not. I mean, I literally want to know not when they came to the US, but when they came to Texas. And so the first thing I would want to do is find a ship's manifest, right?
Right.
Well, there is
none.
Now, I happen to have gone to Prussia where they lived. I was lucky enough to find that. So I know that they got authorization from the local government to immigrate in the year 1855. And I have seen a document in the civil register that says they've already left for America, and that was in October of 1855. So I've got what I need to know that they were coming to America.
Right.
It didn't say they were going to Texas, though.
Right.
And that's what I really wanted to know. So at least I have a date. Most of the time in Texas, they were either coming into Galveston, which was the main port then, or New Orleans.
Right.
So, there are some other things I could do to search more about manifests. But even if I found a manifest, it wouldn't necessarily say they were coming to Texas.
Exactly. I mean, they could have come into any port on the eastern seaboard and traveled to,
Exactly.
I had this problem with trying to find my great-grandparents coming from Scotland. I couldn't find them coming into Philadelphia where I knew they ended up. And at one point, somebody else had said to me, well, their ancestors came over from Glasgow also, but they came into Baltimore and took the train up to Philadelphia.
Yeah.
So I did that route.
Yeah.
Eventually, I found they came directly into Philadelphia. But the point there was the cost of going from Liverpool to Baltimore was cheaper than going from Glasgow to Baltimore. And my ancestors left directly from Glasgow into Philadelphia, so it was cheaper there to go direct. So, that can be an issue of where they really go. They didn't necessarily go to the closest port where they ended up.
Yeah.
So,
the census always, our first reference is the census. And if you're in the 1900 census, 1910, 1920s, fortunately for us, they ask that question: when did you immigrate? They usually ask where you came from.
And if your ancestors told the truth.
Well, I mean, think about it. If they immigrated in 1855 and they're answering a 1910 census, well, let's see, it was about,
Yeah.
But in my case, my great-great-grandfather always said 1855. And just to be sure, I also checked with his sister's answers, and she also said 1855. So I'm pretty square on 1855 as being the right number. But now, where did they go when they got there? So I went to there's no census, and in Texas there wasn't that census. They would, even if it was an 1850 census, they wouldn't have 1855 maybe there, but there wasn't one. So the 1860 census might tell you something, except that, well, I mean, basically all it would tell you is they were there.
Yeah, it really didn't ask questions
right.
about coming in or naturalization or any of that.
Yeah, and so that isn't going to help me very much. So, by the way, they weren't even in the 1860 census, so I don't even know why. I mean, the 1860 census misses a lot of people, it seems like. I don't know what was going on then. Maybe it was, no, the Civil War hadn't started yet. I don't know why, but, and you know what? The name could have been botched so much that the index is, that it's not, I'll have to go through the whole thing to find them.
Line by line.
But it really isn't important because I have some other things that I can find. Now, you would, sometimes the naturalization records, if you get the application, often, that'll say, when did we come and where did I go? Those are hard to find, and there was none here. Military service is a record you usually want to watch, but look at, but those aren't going to necessarily say when they immigrated. Those are more.
And did he end up in the military?
Well, no, because he was already, an older man,
Yeah.
and my great-great-grandfather was only 1 year old, so there was nobody in between. Now, deed records, that's where you really want to start looking, because if they came in, they're probably going to want to buy property pretty quickly, or they're going to want a land grant. And that was the era where all of these Germans were going into Texas with these different land grant schemes. As far as I know, he was never part of any of those. And if he had the opportunity for a land grant, he didn't take it. I mean, they don't just hand you a land grant certificate when you get off the boat. You've got to go apply for that.
And you have to meet the qualifications, the various qualifications. For example, when they were doing later in time the land out in the Plains area, you applied and you got the preliminary and you got land, but then you had to build a house, you had to be a naturalized citizen, things like that. So, you have to meet all the qualifications to finally get the paper that says it's your land.
And by the way, that's really important to remember when you're looking at land grants, because there were so many different programs, and each program had their own qualifiers. So don't just take it for granted that, because about one grant program that it was true on the other one. The other thing was that in Texas, they were issuing these certificates, but it didn't necessarily mean you had to go out and claim your land, and then you had to do a lot of things to get to it. So, just having a certificate didn't really mean that you actually lived there. But when I went to the Harris County Courthouse, I found the first deed was recorded in 1859.
Okay.
And it told me what property it was, because in Texas anyway, they identify, in those early days, they identify all the titles with the starting grant, whoever that was. So 1859, well, let's see, they were here in 1855, so that's a long time.
That's 4 years.
So then I found a tax schedule. And by the way, I'm pretty sure at one point I found the tax schedule just by going into Family Search, and it showed up. When I went in again the other day, just to look at it again, because my copy was blurry, it didn't come up when I just put the name in. Mm-hmm. You got to go to the search catalog. And then Harris County, and then all of those things. So don't forget to do that, because Family Search has got a lot of stuff on it, but it may not show up if you just put in a surname search.
Well, and of course, one of the things is you have to have tax records in the state. Sharon Hodges, who has been a guest many times, and I went and listened to a lecture on tax records for Virginia at the National Genealogical Society conference one year. And we looked at each other and that was something we hadn't explored at that time. We go to New Jersey, they're almost non-existent.
Oh, really?
There are a few here and there. There is no year that the entire state is there. There are some counties where you have zilch. And of course, if you're lucky, like I was with one of my collateral families in Burlington County, the schedules have been published, so they've been transcribed and published. Oh, but Springfield Township, which is the township my ancestors were in.
Naturally.
So I've had no luck with tax records, but they're wonderful where they exist.
And they do exist in Harris County, not every year.
Yeah.
In fact, there was just this one, but it was 1858.
Okay.
And it referred to property that was different from the 1859 deed.
Ah,
It was the Hoskins grant, not the Osborne grant. So I know that in 1858, he had bought some land. Did he buy it in 1857, 56? I can't tell. And when I go back to the Harris County court records, and they have them all indexed by surname, there is no there is no record of that. Now, does that mean they don't have it? Maybe. Or maybe they didn't index it properly. Maybe they didn't read the name properly. I don't know. Someday I'll probably want to go back in, but you used to be able to use their computers. You can't do that anymore. Now there's a guy who wants to do it for you. But still, there's no record.
And can you stand and watch over his shoulder?
Yeah,
Okay.
you can do that. So, if he'll let you.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
But I did that. I already did that. And so, I don't know if he has the patience to go through as much as I would do if they would leave me alone. But anyway, we know that at least sometime during 1858, he bought land. So then, and of course there's another double check that you can always take a look at the children ages. If they had a child who was born in 1856 in Texas, then that would tell me they were in Texas.
Right.
But they didn't. The child that they had born in Texas was in 1861.
Okay.
So that was too late for me.
Yeah.
And they did have a child who was married in 1859. Again, that doesn't help me very much. And boy, that was a long span of children, wasn't it? To have one married and then have another one. But anyway, I have a PowerPoint to put up that just sort of visualizes what I'm trying to deal with here. And I don't know why I never really looked at it before, but look at those two dates. There we go. I've got everything listed, and it's those two questions. Where were they? Did they come into Houston and they lived with, there are no relatives. I've never been able to find any relatives, so they didn't live with relatives. There were some people that they immigrated with, who wound up in Texas, but I don't know if they all, stayed together. I don't know. I mean, Houston was a wilderness in those days. So thank you. That was just a visual, but there's probably going to need more time and effort to put into this search.
So you've found a lot of direct evidence.
Yes.
But you haven't got the question answered.
I haven't got
so where would you go next? Or where did you go next?
Well, so here's what I can either do. I can hire somebody, or I can, get the patience to go through and the time to go through everything else. But I think hiring somebody is probably a good idea. Now, who would I want to look for? I want to look for somebody who is very well steeped in Texas, Texas history, in Texas immigration. I want to go to the Texas Historical Society for a reference. I want to go to the Texas Genealogical Society or somewhere else. Now, I can go to the Association for Professional Genealogists, I can go to APG and ICAPGen and those certifying boards. But, you know, probably, and some of those Texas people may be part of that. So anyway, the point is, they need to say that they are a Texas specialist.
Yes.
Because these are questions that they're going to have to dig way into the history somewhere.
And if you can specifically get someone in the county or the city,
oh, yeah,
you know, who really knows. I mean, I know a lot about New Jersey, but my family is the southern part of the state. So most of the time, unless it's something fairly general, I would not take on somebody whose ancestors lived in the northern part of the state, because I don't know a whole lot about the counties. I don't know the county courthouses. I don't know the historical societies in the northern part of the state or genealogical. I know the southern ones, you know, so I know which one I want to start with as far as research facilities and things like that. So, you know, it really isn't, and I always say, you know, try to get recommendations from people who have used the person, you know, so you get an idea.
And of course in Texas, I mean, when you say Texas German, you're going to think of the Hill Country, right? That's so popular. Well, these guys didn't go to the Hill Country. So let's just talk a minute. So let's say we found somebody. We found a professional genealogist who's steeped in Texas. So how are you going to work with them? What do you think they're going to want to know right off the bat?
They are going to want to know basically everything you know.
Exactly.
Because they don't want to, if they're honest, they don't want to do research that you've already done.
Well, you're going to pay for it.
You're going to be paying for it. And that was when I was taking a lot of clients, that was one of my biggest problems, was people who did not want to give me all that they had. And I learned that early on because I had a woman who wanted to spoon feed me what she wanted me to know.
Yeah.
And finally, after 9 months of almost every time I found something, well, I already have that. Well, why didn't you give me that?
Yeah.
You know, I just kind of dropped her, and she moved on to another researcher who contacted me, and you know, we had a long discussion about what she would be like to deal with. You know, the professional researcher wants to help you, but you have to help them by giving them what you have.
Yeah, and you know what? If it's a lineage question, you know, who's related to whom. I had someone come to me one time and said, "I want to know who my great-great-grandmother was," and I said, "Okay, well, I need to know how it's all connected to you and what you've done." Well, I don't want to tell you that. Well, then, you know, we can research that name, but I can't tell you if they've related to you or not. So what's the point?
The right person that you're pulling stuff out for.
So that's really important. Now, in this case, it's not a lineage, it's a question. My genealogical question is, when did they come to Texas?
Yes.
So those are the relevant things that a researcher's going to want to know. Yeah. All the things that I just went through earlier, that's what they're going to want to see, right? Yeah. And so they're going to, I don't know how you did it, but usually you'll say, Chuck, I want to know when my ancestors came to Texas. I'll share this, here's all the research I've done. And then you might glance at it and say, well, why don't, let's say, give me 4 hours and I'll see, I'll see what's out there and I'll see what needs to be done.
The first thing I would do is examine what have you looked at.
Yes.
And then, you know, from my knowledge, pick out, okay, well, you haven't looked at this or you haven't looked at that, you know.
Yeah. So then you give an estimate.
Then you would say, okay, this is where I propose we start. This is what we start looking at.
And usually you do it in increments of time. You don't just,
Yeah.
Most of the time it's not an open-ended contract.
No.
But
most of the time.
you do write some sort of an agreement, right?
Usually, if you're smart, you do. And, and everything is written up. So, when I find things or don't find things, you end up with a report that says, okay, this is what I looked at.
Yeah.
This is what produced nothing. This is what I looked at. This produced this and this and this. And hopefully found the answer. But, again, it might be something that's more involved. And so it might be at the end of that, I'll say, okay, here's what I think should be done next. And the person can then approve or decide, no, I don't want to. Or I'm going to use your recommendations, but do the work myself.
Yep. So I just wrote some things that the researcher would probably do that, I mean, if you wanted to, then you could do it yourself. But trying to follow up on that property in the 1858, that's probably going to be your closest thing to real good information. But how do you do that? You're going to have to work with the county to do that.
Yeah.
There are books published by Houston, about immigrant groups to Texas, local papers that are not online. There's loose papers at the library. They may not be about your family, but it may tell you something, and sometimes that name might be in there somewhere. Further search on the ship record, I mean, I think that's probably not going to tell you that they came to Texas, but it might be interesting if you're trying to figure out how long would it take to get from New Orleans to Houston. I mean, maybe that's where it accounts for that space. Maybe, were there railroads then? I think there were, but I don't know that it went straight.
And one of the things, too, to add to your list is county histories.
Yeah.
Looking at those old county histories, because I found lots of things in county histories that has been helpful in either answering the question or at least assisting me in moving on to find the answer eventually. So unfortunately, as usual, we've run out of time, but this is so fascinating, to me, Janelle, and of course, hopefully to our visitors, and a little bit of dealing with a professional. I always recommend getting recommendations from people who have used the researcher, if you can. Don't just blindly pick somebody off the internet.
Yeah, that's right. You want to feel good about the information, and you also want to be efficient. You don't want to just throw your money away. There's one other thing I just wanted to say, and that is, if you can find other people who traveled, if I can find other people who traveled and they settled earlier, and that may or may not be something.
The answer.
Indirect evidence takes many different forms, and you need all of them to be able to make a conclusion.
Well, thank you for coming in today.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Good.